You all were really good at getting quiet really quickly. That was impressive. Well, good morning, everyone. I am so thrilled to welcome you all in person to this 4th annual high-level event on advancing the Sustainable Development Goals in the United States. My name is Elizabeth Cousens. I'm President and CEO of the United Nations Foundation, and I'm really thrilled to see so many old and new friends. This is really a fantastic way to start this important week with so many amazing leaders, thinkers, and activists in the United States who care deeply about the promise of the SDGs and who reflect the diversity of experience and expertise that are going to be needed to get them done, both at home and abroad. We're so pleased to be convening this event together with our good partners at the Center for Sustainable Development of the Brookings Institution, and Tony Pipa in particular, whom you'll see in a moment, who is such a champion of the value and the relevance of the SDGs in the United States. You know, when we were negotiating the goals, I don't think we would ever have imagined that we would see SDGs in classrooms like Auburn University in Alabama, or Arizona State University, 2 among many colleges and universities who are training the next generation of sustainability experts. Or that the SDGs would be used to reach across party lines to build regional resilience plans in Florida. Or that the goals would take hold in rural community foundations in Kansas and Minnesota. Or so many other examples of companies, cities, communities using the SDGs to advance the issues they care the most about. We recently conducted a survey with Morning Consult showing that a majority of US adults ranked each of the SDGs as a priority for advancing priorities that they care about for the future of the next generation. And I think that that is because Americans, like most people, see themselves reflected in the goals, like good health, like quality education, safe communities, decent jobs, clean air and water, equality and justice in all its forms. And that shouldn't be a surprise because the goals were based on listening to people worldwide about what they cared the most about. But of course we know that as much as people care about the goals, we're very, very far from getting them done. Joint research that we conducted with the Brookings Institution earlier this year found that even before the pandemic, the United States was not on track to meet a single SDG. That's because as advantaged as we are, we continue to have, as I know everyone here appreciates, significant gaps in access, equity, and opportunity that put millions of people at persistent risk of being left behind. 150,000 people in Jackson, Mississippi have just been without safe drinking water since July. That's just one example. So we need to be very clear about the challenges and be honest that advancing the goals means departing from business as usual. The latest Goalkeepers report, just out from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, estimates that we need to accelerate our rate of change 5-fold to meet the SDGs by 2030, so we need to move faster. Now, we're about to hit the halfway point on the SDGs next year, and leaders will meet at an SDG summit to take stock of where we are and where we need to go. This is a perishable opportunity and one that we cannot miss. We have a remarkable group now here today. We have diplomats, legislators, researchers, business leaders, community activists, and advocates. And in our discussions today, I'd ask that we keep 3 issues top of mind, thinking about that calendar. 1, how can we get more power out of the amazing work that you all do already and represent? 2, how can we better support, connect, and empower communities across the country who want to use the goals already as a framework for action? And in 7 years, when it's 2030, what do we want to say we tried to get done in this critical window of opportunity? So my son happens to turn 21 in 2030. I thought about that a lot when we were negotiating the goals, and I know how I want to be able to answer that question. So I want to thank you all again for joining us here today. Thank you all for all the work you do every day on the goals and in your communities, and especially want to thank all of our incredible speakers who are about to join us. And I am now very pleased to pass the mic on to my good friend and SDG co-conspirator, Tony Pipa. Tony, I think you're coming in from stage right.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that introduction and for that framing of our time together this morning. You know, it was an honor to receive the baton from Elizabeth to pick up the SDG negotiations back in 2015, And so I'm happy to take that baton again this morning to lead us through today's agenda. But before I do so, just a few remarks. From Brookings, we really deeply value the close partnership we've had with the UN Foundation on advancing the SDGs in the U.S. And really, it's wonderful to be back in person for this fourth annual edition of this showcase. So thanks all of you and welcome. I want to express my gratitude to the Foreign Foundation as well for hosting us this morning. Elizabeth has done a wonderful job in providing a frame for our conversations today, so I'll be brief. But again, as we approach the halfway point of the SDGs next year, we are at an important inflection point. The impact of a global pandemic, of conflict, both old and new, including the Russian invasion of Ukraine and political polarization, and of continued economic disruption, have posed serious challenges to progress on the SDGs. And I think we have to be honest and clear-eyed about that. The SDGs have their basis in data, after all, and the data requires us to be sober. At the same time, the data shows that we need the SDGs now more than ever. The challenges we're encountering have demonstrated, for example, the connections among our physical health, our economic health, and the health of our climate. Exactly the interdependencies that are reflected in the SDGs. And the SDGs highlight how solving our challenges at home are a critical basis for U.S. leadership and partnership in solving these challenges globally. And most importantly, the SDGs are providing a basis for all segments of American society to do their part, to unleash their creativity, their ingenuity, and their commitment to solving these challenges. And that's what today is about, to extend those commitments, to expand that innovation, and to look for new ways to create exciting partnerships and move forward more determined than ever to apply that American spirit of leadership to achieving the SDGs. Just a few logistical points as we get started. We encourage you to share thoughts and reactions via social media, hashtag USA for SDGs, and we want to let you know that we're taping this morning's proceedings, and so we're able to post them publicly afterwards. But now I'd like to get the program started, and it's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Lisa Carty, who was nominated by President Biden and approved by the United States Senate to start service in March of this year as the U.S. representative to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, known more colloquially here in New York as ECOSOC. Within the UN system, ECOSOC has the main responsibility for following up on the SDGs, and we're privileged to have Ambassador Carty here to offer her perspective on the role and engagement of the U.S. government in driving SDG progress. Ambassador, thank you for joining us today, and the stage is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. What a real honor it is to be with you today. I want to take a moment to thank the UN Foundation and the Brookings Center for Sustainable Development for giving us this opportunity. Elizabeth and Tony, thank you for all the important work that you've done over so many years. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that Elizabeth was actually one of my predecessors in my current job, and I think she mentioned she was involved with the negotiations. So she has made, as Tony has, really incredible contributions to this work. And I think the world really is a better place for all the effort they've put into getting us as far as we are today. I'd also just like to recognize and tell you a little bit about some of the other distinguished leaders who are going to be here with us. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who's not going to be here in person, but has sent a message. You may know she's really been a leader on the SDGs in the Congress. Without that leadership, we would really not be able to have the progress that we've had already. We're going to see Google.org President Jacqueline Fuller with us, and we have a youth leader from UN Foundation, Himaja Nagireddy. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from them as well. I feel so privileged to speak to you today at such an important topic at such a critical time. The world is facing multiple interlinked crises. The effects of the COVID-19 pandemic are still with us. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has exacerbated food, energy, and humanitarian crises, and climate change continues to upend the lives of millions. Around the world, people look to their governments and international institutions to find solutions to these challenges. There has never been a moment when the UN has mattered more. As we continue to navigate a world filled with uncertainty, one thing that is certain is the United States' support for the UN system and the charter that has guided the UN since its founding 77 years ago. The United States seeks a UN that can respond effectively to transnational challenges, that can help address structural inequalities, that promotes greater economic opportunity, and that is unwavering in its support and leadership for the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. These goals align so closely with our own national aspirations. At their heart, the SDGs are about expanding economic opportunity, social justice, caring for our planet, good governance, and ensuring that no one is left behind. That is the American mission at its core, and that is why the United States is so committed to the SDGs. Unfortunately, as Tony mentioned, today's multiple global crises are having a profound impact on our collective ability to deliver the kind of progress we would like. As the UN's recently released 2022 SDG Progress Report notes, the pandemic has wiped out years of progress on poverty eradication and development. Up to an additional 95 million people are now living in extreme poverty, and 345 million people are food insecure. Delivery of essential health services has been disrupted, and prolonged school closures have put 24 million learners at risk of not returning to school. We have our work cut out for us. While the United States advances all 17 SDGs through our international efforts, in the time we have today, I'd like to share with you a few thoughts on support across a subset of those 17, and then highlight one area where I think greater action now will yield substantial gains. Let's begin with the goals focused on eliminating poverty, ensuring quality education, and promoting economic growth and decent work. These goals not only speak to the importance of unlocking human potential, but they are grounded in giving everyone a chance to prosper and live a productive life. The U.S. for decades has been at the forefront of efforts to lift the most vulnerable out of poverty and to spur economic growth, an area of work that has become more urgent in this pandemic period. USAID's contributions are well known, but other parts of the U.S. government, including the Development Finance Corporation, have made important contributions, as has longstanding U.S. support to the international financial institutions. We're all aware of the unprecedented school closures caused by COVID-19. According to UN estimates, COVID-related education disruptions could result in this generation of children losing a total of $17 trillion in lifetime earnings. The U.S. government has made support for basic education and foundational learning a cornerstone of its efforts to reduce inequality and create opportunity. The SDG goals on ending hunger and ensuring healthy lives are critical to building human capacity and supporting strong communities. For decades, the United States has played a central role in addressing global food insecurity. President Biden's announcement last fall of $10 billion to end hunger and invest in food systems, both at home and abroad, is just one example of that leadership. At the United Nations, we keep food security front and center through meetings of the UN Security Council and a global food security summit that the U.S. will co-chair this week. As the world's leading humanitarian donor, we have provided more than $5.7 billion for food security operations just since February of this year, and we will continue to rally and urge others to do more. We're also deeply committed to Goal 3, good health and well-being. Before the pandemic, the world was making steady progress across multiple indicators, including in reproductive health, infectious disease prevention and control, and maternal and child health. For decades, and with billions invested, the U.S. has worked to strengthen health systems, deliver vaccines, and prevent and treat HIV/AIDS, TB, and malaria. Literally, millions of lives have been saved. The United States remains deeply committed to these endeavors and to working with others to end this pandemic and strengthen global health security so we are better prepared to prevent and respond to future pandemics. Social and economic fallout from COVID has made achieving Goal 5, gender equality, much more difficult. United States efforts to promote gender equality are a particular point of pride. They are grounded in the belief that we cannot maintain peace and security and advance sustainable development unless the rights of all women and girls in all their diversity are respected. One example of this is USAID's investments in programs that support voluntary family planning, women's land tenure, and economic empowerment. We're also working to develop the first global women's economic security strategy to advance leadership in trade, entrepreneurship, financial inclusion, and the digital economy. So how do we accelerate progress on the SDGs at this most critical moment? I said earlier I wanted to make a suggestion that I think can bring real benefit, and that is forcing ourselves to ask, at every opportunity we all have, how do we ensure that everyone really does have a seat at the table as we move towards 2030? Because without a fully inclusive approach that includes women, girls, disabled persons, the LGBTQI community, marginalized racial and ethnic groups, indigenous communities, and youth voices, our SDG efforts cannot truly succeed. The reality is we live in a world where disparities are common and where many, many people continue to be left behind. And when anyone is left behind, progress is neither truly achievable nor sustainable. The Biden administration has put inclusivity at the core of both its domestic and foreign policies, and the President has made diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility a centerpiece of his agenda. And we are trying to bring that into our work in support of the SDGs. For example, with respect to persons with disabilities, the United States made 23 commitments at this year's Global Disability Summit, addressing a range of SDG goals. Secretary Blinken announced in April the State Department's plan to advance racial equity and support for underserved communities in foreign affairs. At the time, he said, and I'm quoting, "Inequality is a national security challenge with global consequences." At the State Department, we have special envoys focused on disability rights, the human rights of LGBTQI persons, and advancing racial equity and justice. Central to the mission of each of these offices is partnership and consultation with members of these communities. Again, we have a lot more work to do, but we're excited to keep these efforts moving forward and to be creating more opportunities for everyone to have a meaningful voice. In preparing for this session, it was so valuable for me to spend some time understanding better all the work going on domestically to advance the SDGs. We are really inspired by the efforts of our city, state, and municipal leaders, including those here today. This subnational leadership is a particular strength of the American model of locally owned, bottom-up development, informed by our grassroots domestic institutions and our commitment to human rights. It's the work that is so well captured by the UN Foundation and Brookings publication, The State of the SDGs in the United States, a report that provides, to my knowledge, the most comprehensive picture of U.S. domestic efforts. And it's particularly exciting to know that here with us today we have leadership from Los Angeles, New York, Pittsburgh, Orlando, and Hawaii, all of whom have completed their voluntary local reviews. Congratulations. In closing, let me say that we all know how critical this moment is as we approach the halfway mark of the SDGs, when so many of the goals have been set back. As we advance our work in support of the 2030 Agenda, let us redouble our efforts, take an inclusive approach, and remember that each of those 17 goals is linked to an individual human life. Let's take our inspiration from leaders like those assembled here today. You all play a vital role in ensuring that the SDGs are truly global goals. We admire the work you have done, and we look forward to collaborating with you to ensure the success of the 2030 Agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Carty, for that recognition of what's happening in places across the U.S., for that commitment to inclusivity and equity as it relates to the SDGs, and also for that landscape of U.S. global leadership and what it can mean to really creating progress on the SDGs. And I think I can safely say that all of us here today and in this crowd stand as a ready partner for the U.S. government to accelerate our efforts together. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here. So we're going to move from the executive branch of the United States government to the congressional branch. Representative Barbara Lee, who represents California's 13th district, has been a champion of the SDGs since their inception. She's been supporting the goals in her role as a senior member of the House Appropriations Committee and a U.S. representative to the UN in previous General Assemblies. Representative Lee has provided some reflections via video about the importance of U.S. leadership on the SDGs. So we'll roll those now.
Hello. Let me take a minute to thank the United Nations Foundation, the Brookings Institution, and the Ford Foundation for organizing this very important event today and for bringing together so many thoughtful voices on how best to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. The SDGs are the international blueprint to ending poverty, protecting our planet, and striving toward peace and prosperity for all peoples. I am so proud to lead the effort in the United States Congress for support of the SDGs. During the last two Congresses, I introduced a House resolution recommitting the United States to implementing our commitments under the SDGs and reaffirming strong U.S. support for gender equality, ending extreme hunger and poverty, improving public health, and so much more. In my role as chairwoman of the State and Foreign Operations Committee of the Appropriations Committee, I am working hard to ensure that our foreign assistance programs are helping to achieve the SDGs. And we need to better understand what is or is not helping us make progress. That is why in the most recent appropriations bill that Congress enacted, I included requirements and language for the Biden administration to report to Congress on how the United States is helping turn all 17 goals into a reality. This is a critical moment as the world continues to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and we face daunting challenges. According to the UN Development Programme's most recent global report, and for the first time on record, human development, as measured by life expectancy, access to education, and standard of living, has dropped for 2 years in a row, taking the world back to standards in 2015, just after the adoption of the SDGs. It will take all of us to stop this backsliding and return to making progress toward achieving the SDGs. We all have a lot to do, and we have plenty to do here at home in America, too. As global goals, the SDGs apply to the United States, too, and we have a job to hold our government accountable for progress. Brookings and the UN Foundation recently exposed that even before the pandemic, our country was not on track to achieve any of the 17 SDGs. Shame on us. On hunger, health, education, and reducing inequality, the report found that the United States was moving backwards. We can't accept this. Failure in the U.S. on the SDGs would be a betrayal of America's promise of opportunity for all and a blow to our efforts to advance human rights and dignity around the world, including in the United States. In addition to chairing the State Foreign Operations Subcommittee, I also co-chair with Leader Hoyer the Majority Leader's Task Force on Poverty and Opportunity. We are working to mobilize House members around the steps we need to take to reach these goals in the United States. It is so important to recognize that achieving these goals, like everything, has a political dimension. It's important that you ask members of Congress to support these goals and sign on as co-sponsors to HRS 30. The American public needs to embrace the SDGs and how they relate to their daily lives. I hope you will help build public support for this. Thank you so much for your help in this fight, and it's an honor and a privilege to work alongside all of you. Let's recommit ourselves today to leaving no one behind and reaching our 17 goals for everyone, everywhere. Thank you again.
Well, thank you to you, Representative Lee, for your continued support of the goals and leadership, and also for that pep talk. And remember to talk to your congressional member. She just laid out a whole agenda there for you. So I'm expecting a lot of calls to constituent offices. We're now going to turn to the private sector, a sector which really plays a crucial role in ensuring efforts towards the goals and ensuring that they reach our most vulnerable communities and that we're actually leveraging the comparative advantage that the private sector brings. And today we're joined by Jacqueline Fuller, the president of Google.org. As the philanthropic arm of Google, Google.org is working to solve some of humanity's biggest challenges. And Jacqueline is here to tell us about how they do that within the context of the SDGs. Jacqueline, stage is yours. Thanks very much for being here.
Good morning. Well, it's an honor to be here among friends. Ambassador Carty and I go way back to the Gates Foundation 20 years ago. And it was wonderful in the green room just chatting with friends and colleagues and realizing all of the programs that we're working on together. So it's great to be here. Look, I think the question that we all have to ask ourselves is, with the SDGs being so clear and the world finally having a game plan, us finally being able to come together and saying we know what to do, how to do it, we know how to measure it, the real question, I think, is how can we get the private sector more engaged? How can we step up as companies globally and ask the same question that all of us are asking ourselves, whether as individuals, whether as organizations and institutions, researchers? We need to ask ourselves, how am I uniquely gifted to make a difference? What is my differential strength that I can bring, that our company can bring to achieving the SDGs together as a global community? Well, as Google, our CEO, Sundar Pichai, has said, we are an AI, artificial intelligence, first company. What that means is we are betting our business on the fact that advanced technologies can help spur growth and reduce costs in ways that we've never seen before. And we've seen how tools and approaches using data, doing data analytics, using artificial intelligence and machine learning have revolutionized the business world. Not just Google, but across the business world. We've seen this across communications, in teaching, in learning, in science, in communications, even in entertainment. But you know where we haven't seen enough of it? Is the social sector. Is asking the questions, how can advanced technologies thoughtfully applied help us to achieve the SDGs? Because here's the truth. We're not going to get there in the time that we need to get there as a global society by just linearly progressing and doing a little bit more of the same thing. We need step change breakthroughs. And this is where advanced technology can really be helpful. So this is where we have been thinking and asking ourselves, how can we as a company contribute to the SDGs, particularly through applying AI? I'll give you just one quick example of one of our internal teams, how they're applying AI. So our Google researchers have looked at the huge challenge of global flooding. And as these floods happen, they typically will impact the poorest and most marginalized, folks living along rivers, in shacks and shanties, along low-lying areas. But what if, instead of just responding to crises, we were able to predict when these disasters were going to occur and help prevent through advanced warning and save lives instead of just coming in after the crises and providing help? Well, as it turns out, applying machine learning onto satellite imagery, river flow analysis, and taking predictive patterns in climate, both in the past and then looking forward, by bringing these together, we can actually predict floods. And when we do that, we can send out advanced warnings and are now actually doing that. And there's been more than 115 million advanced notifications on floods. So this is just an example of where applying some of these advanced technologies can really change the game and not just have us continue on the path that we're already on, but taking completely different paths to ways that we can help save lives. So, but we know as Google that the promises of advanced technology and artificial intelligence, that bringing those solutions is not something that any individual company or frankly group of companies is going to do. This is not about the tech companies coming in to save the day, although we certainly could see more action from the sector in terms of how we're applying the best of who we are as a business to these challenges, but it's also looking out into the vast world and seeing so many ideas from the folks on the front lines who are the real experts, who have ideas about how to apply these advanced technology to the problems that they're working on, whether that's education or gender equity or climate or hunger. There are nonprofits, social enterprises, UN agencies, there are researchers everywhere globally working on projects where they know they could apply these advanced tools if they had the keys that they need, the funding, the expertise, the models, the data. So we tried an experiment a few years ago where we had a global open call. We put out $25 million, and honestly, we didn't know what was going to happen. We just said, what are your brilliant ideas for using technology, advanced technology, to help the SDGs? And we were blown away. We got more than 2,800 applications from around the world, and teams just came up with so many brilliant ideas. I'll give you just one quick example. A team from Nagireddy University in Kampala is working on the problem of air pollution. WHO estimates there's at least 4 million deaths a year just straight from air pollution. And in a lot of places like Kampala with very serious air pollution problems, they don't actually have the data available to help even understand how bad is the situation, what mitigation strategies are most helpful. Well, the team there had a brilliant idea of coming up with they created a very, very low-cost sensor, and then they wanted to put them on motorbikes, on scooter taxis, who voluntarily were going to take the low-cost sensors, drive them all around the city, access the data, and then use that data to inform mitigation strategies and help to inform people about air pollution. Now that is an idea, that is an example where the analytics could then come in and help inform the team based on all of that data they were gathering from the motorbikes, from placing them in school, these low-cost sensors that they designed in schools, and then the artificial intelligence machine learning could help do the analytics to then provide policy analysis and save real lives. So that's an example of someone who was a partner, a winner in the past. And what we've learned from that experiment is for one thing, there is huge demand out there. There is huge demand in the social sector to be able to apply the best of technology to the problems they're working on. But the critical thing, number one, is funding and making sure that we're providing risk capital. And I think this is where my fellow philanthropists can step up even more to ensure that we're applying true risk capital, that we're willing to take informed risks, to bet on solutions that may or may not work. And that is a way where we can contribute to the huge markets of scale, the engines of scale, which are the global markets and government funding. This is where I think catalytic philanthropy can come in and play a unique role. The second is expertise. This is an example of where teams need the funding. They also need expertise. So one of the things that we have switched up at Google is that we now provide our employees to go in and work, and will embed up to 6 months full-time, data analytics, ML, whatever is needed, UI experts sometimes, and embed full-time. And then the third thing is making sure that we have access to quality data sets that are inclusive and that are applying to our most vulnerable citizens globally. And so we have worked across the sector with Rockefeller, with others, with MasterCard, who's here, to ensure that we are contributing to global data sets that can be used to then build these tools and analysis. So these are 3 things that we've learned on how to do this and do this well. We've just announced this week that we're investing another $25 million open call. So if you have ideas, if you know people who have ideas and would like to apply for that, it's open to social enterprises, nonprofits, agencies, researchers. We would really love to help get behind some of these researchers who are the best and the brightest and have brilliant ideas and are going to help us to reach the SDGs faster and at scale, but just need the support and the advanced technology to kind of be that wind beneath their wings and to help lift up their dreams, their solutions, their ideas. So I think it's an open challenge for all of us in business to ask ourselves the question, how are we uniquely able to contribute using the strengths and who we are? And then how can we apply that in very pragmatic ways to help all of us as global citizens, to help all of us come together to achieve the SDGs faster. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for incentivizing and catalyzing solutions to accelerate progress on the SDGs. It's going to be really exciting to see the innovations that emerge from that leadership and that commitment. And certainly build some momentum for taking action on the SDGs across different sectors, which ties nicely into the theme of the panel discussion we'll have shortly. We're now going to hear from Dean Sanjeev Kagram, the Director General and Dean of the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University. Dean Kagram planned to be here in person, but was unexpectedly called away, so we're pleased to share some recorded remarks.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Jambo, hola, namaste, salam alaikum, ni hao. Distinguished leaders, partners, and friends from around the world, my name is Dr. Sanjeev Kagram. I have the great privilege and honor of being the Director General and Dean of the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University. It is my honor and privilege to join this session, and I want to thank my sisters and brothers at the UN Foundation and Brookings Institution for their continued leadership on the US role in the Sustainable Development Goals worldwide towards 2030, and bringing us all together again to activate all of our energies, capacities, assets, capabilities, passions towards achieving this transformative set of goals. My deepest apologies for not being able to be with you there in person. Some family matters have kept me away. Let me first tell you a little bit about Thunderbird. The Thunderbird School of Global Management has been in existence for 76 years. Our vision is a world of sustainable and equitable prosperity, and our mission is to train, educate, empower, and influence global leaders and managers in this fourth industrial revolution and Anthropocene towards that end, sustainable and equitable prosperity and peace. As a result, our commitment and action and involvement and dedication to the Sustainable Development Goals is core to our vision. We have a set of values that are about the school from its very beginning. We oppose all forms of corruption and exploitation. We respect the rights and dignity of all people, and we advance sustainable and equitable prosperity and peace worldwide. Thunderbird, along with our sister school, the Global Futures College and Lab, incredibly unique, one of a kind in the world at Arizona State University, coordinates our university-wide task force on the Sustainable Development Goals at Arizona State University. Thunderbird is the #1 ranked school, Masters in Management, Times Higher Education 2019. ASU has just been ranked #1 in innovation for the 8th consecutive year in the United States, and is the #1 ranked university for SDG impact at the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings in the United States and #2 worldwide. From our president throughout all of our leadership at Arizona State University, at the Global Futures College and Lab, at the Thunderbird School of Global Management, all of our units, there is deep and abiding commitment to advancing the Sustainable Development Goals in a transdisciplinary way, breaking down silos and barriers in a multi-stakeholder way, ensuring that all are involved and engaged in advancing the 2030 agenda. We are committed to all 17 goals, and in particular to SDG 17. At Thunderbird specifically, we have done a whole range of initiatives and continue to advance a whole range of initiatives with respect to the Sustainable Development Goals. We're the institutional partner of the UN Global Compact USA network here at home. We are also the partners of UN Global Compact networks in Indonesia, Kenya, and other countries around the world, and work very closely with the Global Compact Secretariat in New York City. We have launched arguably the most transformative higher education or education project initiative in human history, the Francis and Dion Najafi 100 Million Learners Initiative, where we are seeking to reach 100 million learners over the next 10 years with the global and digital leadership management and business skill sets necessary for success in the 21st century. The program is 100% digital, will be translated into 40 different languages, and offered at no cost to learners around the world. It truly is remarkable, and you can see more about it at 100millionlearners.org. We have also launched and are the Secretariat, along with our sister school, the Global Futures College and Lab, the Global Carbon Removal Partnership, a multi-stakeholder initiative launched at COP26, initiated at WEF in January 2020, to innovate and scale carbon solutions, policy, standards, all that is necessary to ensure that carbon removal, which is the critical third pillar of climate transformation, is scaled to the degree necessary to not only achieve the Paris targets and 1.5 degrees Celsius maximum, but reducing our carbon footprint from now 420 parts per million and growing back to around 350 parts per million or less, where we as humanity flourished for the last 100 to 200 years. At the Global Futures College and at Thunderbird and across ASU, we have many such incredible initiatives. And so our commitment, as you can see from this, because of our leadership, the resources we've dedicated, our values, at Arizona State University, we judge ourselves by who we include, not who we exclude. And I've shared, of course, the vision and mission of the Thunderbird School in particular. When I came to Thunderbird and ASU 4 years ago, I had just stepped down from launching the Global Partnership on Sustainable Development Data, but I continued to be a senior advisor for the SDGs initiative in Los Angeles. We continue to support that effort at Thunderbird and ASU over the last 4 years. And there has been incredible success thanks to the leadership of Mayor Garcetti, Deputy Mayor Nina Hajikian, and the SDG lead advisor and driver, Aaron Bramajan. We have also launched Phoenix Global Rising with Mayor Kate Gallego and the city of Phoenix to make Phoenix a truly model global city, inclusive, sustainable, innovative, entrepreneurial, and transformative in every way. As part of that, with Mayor Gallego's incredible leadership and support and commitment to global progress and bringing that to our local setting, I'm proud to announce that she has authorized me to share that we will be conducting a voluntary local review for the city of Phoenix on our SDG efforts as a community and presenting that at next year's UNGA with her leadership and support. So let me end here, dear friends, sisters and brothers who are committed to the Sustainable Development Goals more broadly, and particularly to a robust and very active, engaged, respectful, multi-stakeholder role of the United States, US government, civil society, the private sector, academic institutions like ours. We at Thunderbird and the Global Futures College and Lab at Arizona State University are all in. This must be the decade of delivery, and we will together leave no one behind. Thank you so much for your time, and please know that we are your partners in this great effort to transform the world. All my best.
Well, we're grateful that Dean Cogram was able to share some reflections with us, and you can hear in his reflections the level of participation and leadership that's actually coming from the local level and across different sectors in the U.S. And such multifaceted leadership is going to be the basis for our panel discussion. Please join me in welcoming our moderator and panelists for that discussion to the stage. Our moderator will be Rachel Pittman, who's the Executive Director of the United Nations Association of the United States. The UN Association has over 20,000 members and 225 chapters across the country, all united in a commitment and belief that each of us can play a part in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Rachel, I'll turn it over to you and allow you to introduce the panelists as well. Thanks very much for being here.
Good morning, everyone. Great. I first want to say thank you to Ambassador Carty, Representative Barbara Lee, Jacqueline Fuller, Dean Cargram, for sharing their invaluable perspectives with us today. As Tony said, my name is Rachel Bowen Pittman, and I have the privilege to serve as Executive Director of the United Nations Association of the USA. As he said, we are a 20,000 members strong across the US, supporting the vital work of the United Nations. 60% of our membership is under 26 within those 225 chapters. And we're united in our commitment to global engagement and just believing that all of us can play a part in advancing the UN's mission and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. At UNA USA, we like to say that it will take all of us to achieve and actualize the SDGs, not just governments, but businesses, civil society, people like you and me. We all need to take action. And I know this is true. I see it every day within our chapters across the US. Just to give you a couple examples, our UNA Los Angeles chapter, they raise funds to furnish homes for young people that were aging out of foster care or who were recently unhoused. Our UNA Greater Detroit chapter provides water testing resources, and they also provided bottled water for Flint and Hamrock, Michigan, after they found lead in their water. And UNA Louisville, they work with local law enforcement to combat human trafficking in their community. And they also host educational events so that people understand how people are being trafficked, but also how to help them when they learn that they're being trafficked. And so in a recent analysis by Brookings in the UN Foundation, it showed that even before the pandemic, the US was not on track to fully achieve a single SDG, with particularly dire consequences for the future of well-being of American youth, women, and minority racial and ethnic groups. And as we approach the SDGs halfway mark next year, we have an opportunity to build on that bright spot of the SDGs through action and leadership, and deepen our engagement and identify opportunities to do more. So that's why I'm really thrilled to be moderating this panel today. And we'll have a great discussion of leaders from across the country and talk about what they're doing in their different sections and how they're taking action. So I am pleased to introduce our wonderful panelists representing 3 sectors. To my left, we have Dr. Helen Bond, University Professor in the School of Education, a member of the Center for Women, Gender, and Global Leadership, as well as a liaison to the Center for African Studies at Howard University. Salah Goss is the Senior Vice President for Social Impact at MasterCard's Center for Inclusive Growth, and Ridgway White is the President and CEO of the Charles Stuart Mott Foundation. So welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. So we need effort from all sectors to achieve the SDGs, particularly the private sector. Salah, how has MasterCard integrated the SDGs across its work, and how do MasterCard's sustainability objectives support and align with its commercial goals?
Thank you for the question. And first, just thank you for inviting us to be here. Thank you for holding this panel. I think the discussion is important, and as I think we're getting to the halfway mark, even more and more important. So I was talking to someone in the green room, and I was saying that I think one of the things to remember, if you remember nothing else that I say, is that we made a decision pretty early on. I remember before the SDGs, it was the MDGs. Mm-hmm. And we made a decision to kind of treat these goals as business important. And what I mean by that is how to make the execution of them germane to our business model. And so we have pledges that you might be familiar with the World Bank. I think it was 2015, we pledged 500 million inclusive in the economy. We've reached that. Now we've pledged 1 billion. We're also working on 250 million small businesses included in the economy. And that's important, I think, to point out, because those are kind of things we know how to do. We know how to do financial inclusion. We know how to work on small business. I was in the business actually for 7 years before I joined the Center for Inclusive Growth, which is our philanthropic hub. So very conscious of how these goals can really be part of our business. And so in kind of looking at that, and Jacqueline, a colleague at Google, said it best, like, do what you're good at, right? And so we picked a couple SDGs specifically to work on. Number 8, in terms of economic development, I can mention our small business work. So we have a program that's launching actually next week called Strive. And it's based on 5 years of funding CDFIs and figuring out what small businesses really need to be part of the economy. No surprise, they need capital. So how to unlock capital from the community financial institutions that fund them. They need know-how, and they need to succeed in the digital economy. Another goal we looked at very seriously is climate change and ESG. You might have seen, I know our inboxes and LinkedIn is cluttered. Not too long ago, there was an announcement that we actually are linking not just executive pay, but everyone's pay to the attainment of ESG principles that we set out. We have a sustainable innovation lab that we've set up for our partner banks, as well as something called the carbon calculator. So you can actually kind of measure your carbon footprint. And the last thing I'll mention is something else I also helped to run, is our racial equity pledge. So in 2020, we pledged $500 million for the first 5 years to help close the wealth and opportunity gap. And you can't talk about inclusive growth or inclusivity, at least in the US, where I'm focused, without talking about racial equality. So those are just 3 examples of how we try to tie very closely to the SDGs to what we're doing in terms of business. But I think just the decision early on to make it germane to what we do and kind of try to focus on what we're good at, I think is what's really made the difference.
Yeah, that makes a good point. With UNA USA and our chapters, they focus on what are the needs within their communities. So you may not be able to do it all 17, but there are things that, what are you good at, what you should focus on. Thank you. Dr. Bond, at Howard University, your research includes using education for sustainable development and providing people with the skills to work towards a sustainable future. You also co-chair the Sustainable Development Solutions Network USA, which is a network of universities and research institutions committed to the Sustainable Development Goals. How should universities leverage their intellectual and human capital to be a catalyst for change at the local and global level, including supporting work across sectors?
Thank you, Rachel, for that wonderful introduction and for that question. Welcome to you all. And I just do have to say that I'm looking out and I'm actually seeing a colleague that I've worked with for the last year or two, seeing her for the first time face-to-face. Pipa, hello, SDSN, so thank you to all. Universities are really special places for the SDGs. I see universities as almost an island for this kind of work. What do you have at universities? You have young people, you have open minds, you have research, you have expertise. And that can contribute to the development, the research in terms of developing the data, the disaggregated data that's needed to really focus on, this notion of leaving no one behind. Without research, you certainly can't determine who's being left behind and why. And the work of SDSN USA, we are here. I have colleagues in the back. Thank you. It's wonderful to see you doing great work in terms of mapping and monitoring the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDSN, as some of you may well know, SDSN USA, it's a network of universities, 169 plus in 46 states, doing great work at determining how far we have to go and what we have to work on in terms of achieving and implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. A couple of signature publications I think is important. I certainly would not want to not mention them, and that's the Sustainable Development Report, the SDRs, which really do give an overview of how far we're progressing. And I've heard some speakers prior to here that we're really not making the progress that we should. We've done work on U.S. cities because the localization efforts, we're working with Cleveland with the help of Pipa and others, is going to be really important places for the work in the implementation of the SDGs. And also in terms of, we have a very much so a focused lens on racial equity. I appreciate your comments and your support of HBCUs in this matter, because they really do play a great role in this, and I'll talk about minority serving institutions. But I'm also co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Justice Working Group at SDSN USA, where we're looking at, and I'll maybe respond to the question around equity, without justice, without peace. We've had a leadership council here, SDSN USA meeting, and one common thing we've heard across, and we bring many different groups of people to the table, is that the SDGs are not going to be able to be implemented without peace. Peace is very important. So universities play a critical role, not just in what they do with young people and students and bright faculty bringing their ideas to the table, but there's an advocacy role, there's an innovation role, there's a leadership role as well, but also universities themselves as institutions play a very important role. They can lead, they can take place or support voluntary national reviews. I'm seeing some other colleagues of mine smiling that way. And so they can actually serve as case studies for this work. So thank you for that great question.
And I appreciate Howard University giving our Howard chapter the space to do their work in supporting the UN. Hi, Ridgeway. Philanthropies play an important role in funding and advocating for nonprofits and communities doing the hard work of social change in the United States. They are deeply invested in trying to address some of the greatest challenges, including enormous impact that COVID has made on American life, as well as climate change and the structural inequities of this country. We see more and more foundations finding value in the SDGs as a framework to organize the response in the connected way and measured impact. So how do you first come to the SDGs, and how is the Mott Foundation integrating the SDGs into some of its programs?
Sure. Well, it's great to be here, and thanks for that question. First and foremost, the Mott Foundation's mission statement is based on having a sustainable, just, and equitable society, and that's been our mission tenets for almost 100 years. And so when we think about the SDGs and their goals, they really resonate with us. We're also based in Flint, Michigan, and although we do funding all over the globe, Flint has been a community that's been left behind, and one of the origins of the Sustainable Development Goals is leave no one, no community behind. And so we really take that to heart and thinking about what we're doing. But based on working on a local level in Flint and across the globe, we see that communities need to adopt these goals, and they need to focus on them in order to have change. And so that's why we're really hyper-focused on the local level of having impact with larger goals up above. Some of the things we're working on, clean water, obviously. Access to justice. We've been working on access to justice across the globe for over 30 years, primarily focused on grassroots legal empowerment. We're also focused on access to energy and education and a number of other things that relate to the SDGs. And so what we do is we record every single grant that we make against an SDG. So this year we'll make about $200 million in grants, and every single one of them will be recorded against the SDGs, and we're hoping that the larger spectrum of philanthropy and community philanthropy joins on that. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, just measuring our impact so we know if we're advancing, it's really important. So I want to zoom in a little bit more to explore what the work looks like in practice. So a key priority for MasterCard's Center for Inclusive Growth is financial inclusion, which you've worked on both globally and domestically here in the US. In particular, you lead MasterCard's effort to help close the racial wealth gap, working in communities across the country. Can you just talk a little bit more about the work and what it looks like, and what are some of the greatest remaining challenges that you have here in the U.S.?
Yeah, great question. And I think as we think about the SDGs, I think that the river that runs through it is really access. And in the Center for Inclusive Growth, which is a philanthropic hub of MasterCard, our theory of change is really your proximity to networks, whether they're financial networks, social networks, information, digital networks, really is a predictor of your success. And when you think about the racial wealth and opportunity gap, it really is a question of, or a circumstance of lack of access for historical reasons, for barriers that have been there for quite a long time. So in 2020, I think like a lot of other foundations and companies, we made a pledge toward the racial wealth and opportunity gap. But the way I talk about it is just the next natural step for us. I talked about our commitment to include 500 million, then 1 billion, work with small businesses. And I think it's just a part of a larger picture of equity. And so that's kind of how we think about the work. And so we designed it in 7 cities. And again, going back to what I said before, really took a hard look on what we could do in a way that was authentic but sustained. One of the first things we did was to make sure that we were working through the right partners. It was a new commitment to us. I think it was a laser focused on racial disparities, not just inclusion, but there are organizations who have been doing this well, HBCUs, for example, for hundreds of years. So the first thing we did was really look around for the right partners, and we're obsessed with proximity. Whether it's in the US, where I've worked, or globally, people who are most proximate to the problem usually can unlock part of that solution. So with that in mind, we picked 7 cities, as I mentioned, and we're working in 4 pillars. One is financial inclusion and literacy, which should be no surprise. The other one is small business, so we really work on ownership for Black-owned businesses, but not just ownership, and I'm sure everyone's heard this statistic, how quickly Black-owned businesses are popping up, especially Black women-owned businesses. Opening is one thing, thriving and succeeding is another. And so really focusing on getting them the access and the networks and the education that's needed. The third place we focus on is household welfare. So that's kind of the unit of measurement. So where are there moments in a household's income where you can either retain wealth, you get to gain wealth, or you can lose wealth? And so in a city like St. Louis, where if you cross the street in a street called Del Mar, a white household has 10 times the earning potential of a Black household just kind of crossing back over. We work on work in differently skilled pathways to employment. In a place like Atlanta, which is another city, for example, where you are pretty much guaranteed if you're born into poverty to stay in poverty, we work on poverty alleviation and some asset building. And then the fourth sector where we work or area is with mayors. And so we know whether it's ARPA or other funding, there's generationally changing amounts of capital coming down from the federal government, kind of New Deal type of sums. And so we use our data tools to help mayors apply them so communities that have traditionally been left out aren't. And they can be at the table with data tools and using data-driven decision-making, not only for the placement of the federal funding, but for policies as well. So that's just a little kind of quick overview of the work that we do. But again, I think it's in line with working through our partners, putting the people we want to focus on at the center, and really trying to stay aligned with what we're good at and what we can sustain.
Yeah, and I like how you said you're working with partners that are close to the issues and bringing them to the table. Dr. Bond, as co-chair of the, I'm sorry, I lost my place there. As co-chair of the SDGs Working Group on Diversity, Equity, and Justice for Sustainable Development, you recently contributed to 2 reports on how the U.S. is leaving communities of colors behind and failing to deliver on racial equality. How is addressing racial inequality within the U.S. central to achieving meaningful sustainability? And can you tell us a little bit more about the work that SDSN and Howard University is doing to lead the way in addressing the racial gap through sustainable development?
Thank you, Rachel, for that question. Before I get started, I want to give homage to others that have contributed to that great report. I'm thinking about Elena Lynch of SDSN, Carolyn and others, Dr. Clarence Lucane of Howard University. I can't think of anything more important than addressing racial inequality, racial discrimination, sexism, and racism in achieving the SDGs. I want to start out by saying one thing about Howard University and in terms of proximity. Howard University, MSIs in general, doing great work proximate to that. Glad to be a partner in SDSN. In one of the signature works that you described, it's titled In the Red, How the U.S. Has Failed to Deliver on a Promise of Racial Equality. What was done in that report that I think makes it so very special is that they really took a mapping and a monitoring of the delivery of SDGs, clean water, quality education, free and open workplaces without sexism, and all the 17 SDGs, and sort of compared them, the progress toward achieving them in comparison with white communities, keeping in mind, using the framework of leaving no one behind. And what they discovered, what we discovered, is that the delivery of those services, those promises, those interconnected SDGs were being delivered to white communities at 3 times the rate that they were being delivered to Black, brown, and indigenous communities. I just want everyone to sit with that just for a moment. 3 times. They did a series, there's a report and there's an index. I'm looking at some of the great people that contributed to that index work, where they showed, depicted it on a map. That's the reason it gets the title of In the Red. And you look at the map, and red is basically no progress, and green is substantial progress. Now, there were some areas better than others. Let me give homage where certainly homage is due. But in areas like SDG 16, peace and strong institutions, the map was absolutely red. And in most cases, being a teacher, when I wrote the preface of that, I described it as if you were to give a grade based upon that comparison to Black, brown, and indigenous communities achieving the SDGs as white communities. And basically, your child would be bringing home a grade card that had all Ds and Fs. There's no possible way. I don't see a pathway for America to achieve the SDGs on any level with those, looking at the latest U.S. Census Bureau and the growth of minority communities, whether they're growing or not, there's a justice aspect to that. So that is a very serious indictment there. So I'll just leave it at that. But do look up that report, In the Red, SDSN. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Question.
And one of the things that we try to do more of at UNA USA is to educate people about the SDGs so they understand the interconnectivity and how we can work together to advance these and solve these issues. And Ridgeway, often we speak about the SDGs, especially around settings like this, around the UN General Assembly Week, and we talk about them in global terms. But the SDGs offer us a way to grapple with the interconnectedness of challenges anywhere and everywhere. And at the Mott Foundation, you are deeply rooted in the community, as you said, with Flint, Michigan. What are some of the lessons would you offer from your experience in working in Flint as it faces challenges at a nexus of health and economic, social, and racial inequalities?
Sure. Well, what Helen was saying just rings true. I'm thinking about our report card for Flint and going, that's what you do, right? So the SDGs are really important because they remind us that it's not an international thing. It's focused for everyone. It's focused on local places like Flint, Michigan. And so, Salah, it was really exciting to hear that you're thinking about places like Flint and expanding small businesses and things like that, because the SDGs are working in that aspect of bringing the issues to the table for all of us. At the Mott Foundation, we focused, coming out of the water crisis, right? We granted $100 million to help Flint recover and rise, but it was really just a giant magnifying glass, right? That's the water crisis served as a magnifying glass of all the issues that have been facing Flint for decades. An example of what happens when you disregard a community for decades. And, you talk about, redlining and things like that. I mean, we, as a country, systematically redline entire communities. We hear certain statistics and say, no, thank you, right, as locating a company or locating a job or anything like that. So we're focused on that at the Mott Foundation and how to help communities like our hometown of Flint here and across the globe on how to achieve greater opportunity and ensuring that equity is at the center of everything that we do. And so our grant making is really, place-based, but thinking about those larger goals and trying to bring that together in a way that makes sense, that allows communities to connect. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I want to talk about how community foundations can play that role as well.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk more about it later, but we're running out of time. So I'm going to just do a quick rapid fire with the panel and ask that in 1 minute or less, what is one transformational action you'd like policymakers or your community to take to help us move closer to achieving the SDGs? And Dr. Bond, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, very quickly, I'm thinking about...
Use your mic.
I was just thinking about my the International Conference on Sustainable Development, and I'll be talking about the importance of the ratifying the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that it is supportive of what the SDGs very much so align. So I just like for us to keep that in mind, because child rights are human rights too.
Yes, Sala.
That's a hard one. I think what I would say is just realizing that no one sector is going to solve it alone, which might sound obvious, but public-private partnerships getting to real, sustainable, meaty ones are still a challenge. I worked before MasterCard at the Gates Foundation, the Soros Foundation, in the government, and there's so much translation that still needs to be done. So if I would say one thing, allow the private sector to play to its strengths. Profit is not a bad word, because that's how things are sustained. And being really thoughtful about breaking down the barriers to setting up a model where everybody can bring their assets to the table in a real way.
I heard this quote the other day, and I don't know who to attribute this to, but it said, if great things seem challenging, seem unachievable, focus on doing little things great. And I love that. And when I think about it as a relation to SDGs, I think about philanthropy and measuring all of our goals. So the Ford Foundation, the Mott Foundation, Hewlett, all of us, all of our peers measuring the same way. When I think about community philanthropy, ensuring that these local levels, that if we all have these goals that are measured in the same way, we're working in our own community on incremental change, all of a sudden, working towards these goals together, that incremental change becomes systemic change. And so I think that works. And then as the United States, like the voluntary review, we're one of the only countries, like 4, that hasn't done that. So why not start there?
Thank you. So thank you all for providing your insights on how your organizations are advancing the SDGs, specifically with local communities. I hope you all got a better understanding of why we don't leave it up to just governments to take action. It's going to take all of us, once again, businesses, civil society. I will also want to say that it's important to include youth voices, which you'll hear about soon from our UNA USA Youth Observer to the UN, and she'll tell you why. But we have to be inclusive and bring everyone to the table to address these issues, because they do affect us all. So I'd like to welcome you to join me in thanking our panelists today for being here. Thank you. And I think someone's going to come behind me. So I welcome the panel to either stay or silly off screen, but I would like to introduce Himaja Nagireddy, who is our 11th UNA USA Youth Observer to the UN. So thank you for being here, Himaja.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you all for being here today. So I'd like to start with the fact that for me and for many people with immigrant backgrounds, our story begins with the story of our parents and ancestors. So when asked to share my story here today, I shared this. My mom, Pratima, and my dad, Siva, were born and raised in Andhra Pradesh in southern India. My mom grew up in her ancestral village of Arabalam, and my dad grew up in his ancestral village of Patapalli. Their struggle for immigration, for a better life, was how I came to be born in Massachusetts. I grew up in a suburban town called Acton, Massachusetts, the oldest of three. I struggled with the lack of self-confidence and self-valuing my voice and had a hard time embracing the multiple parts of my identity, not being Indian enough at home and not being American enough for school. I entered my undergrad at the University of Connecticut, still trying to find myself and my place in my community. I entered, and it was around that time that I heard about the United Nations Association of the USA, UNA USA. And though I didn't have any background in international relations, I fell in love with the Sustainable Development Goals and thought I would start a chapter to share those goals with other students in our community. And it was people within my UNA USA family that helped me uplift and self-value my own voice. They helped me find my self-confidence, which I couldn't see before. They showed me that through their actions, advocacy can manifest in really beautiful and diverse ways, joined by an underlying motif of protecting universal human rights and dignity. I learned that advocacy doesn't have to be perfect, and it can be based on the love and hope we have for ourselves, each other, and our world. As the 11th UNA USA Youth Observer to the United Nations, I am so excited to be carrying on the legacy of our 10 previous Youth Observers. Over the years, young members have made up more and more of our UNA USA leadership. Young people are the greatest stakeholders in what happens today, and the UN is dedicated to delivering on its promise to build a better world for future generations. This means not only listening to them and amplifying their voices, but really providing young people with a seat at decision-making tables. Recently, Secretary General Guterres shared his vision for the future, calling on more inclusive and effective multilateralism in a landmark report, Our Common Agenda. The only way forward is together. And young people contributed significantly to that report. Last year, in recognition of the UN's 75th anniversary, many young people shared their thoughts during UN 75 consultations. Their feedback was sent to UN officials and greatly inspired the development of Our Common Agenda, incorporating many of the themes that emerged during UN 75 consultations. Also, can we get a quick round of applause for a massive and recent accomplishment of youth advocacy, the newly approved UN Youth Office. Thank you for indulging me. Thank you. So I want to be clear. Our voices are fundamental. Our input is helping the UN to outline priorities in an ever-changing world, setting a clear path forward to delivering on its promise for a better future for everyone, everywhere. That is our impact, and that is how we are contributing to the blueprint for the world to follow. So what are young people calling for? As I start my journey in this new role, I hear the same resounding asks that my predecessors did. I spoke with a young person who lives in Chinatown in Boston and has seen the effects of gentrification by the unwilling displacement of her family and community. I spoke to another young person from Telugu-speaking origins like my family, who struggled in her early years of education because the only words she knew in English were please and thank you. And that is why she now advocates for more supportive literacy learning programs. A few days ago, I also had the opportunity to speak with a class of 8th graders in Atlanta, Georgia, and ask them to share an idea then share issues they really cared about. They called for bold climate action and the protection of environmental justices. They called for a more gender-equal world. They called for more youth mental health support. They called for racial and ethnic justice. Many of them had never heard of the SDGs, but somehow managed to list off the entire table. And then I showed them the table, and I showed them the Sustainable Development Goals, and their eyes widened. It was an incredible experience. It was incredible seeing their thoughts for how we can build a better future actualized into these goals, goals that the whole world is striving towards. And then I told them that the plan was to achieve the SDGs by 2030, and panic set in every single one of their eyes. And that started a whole discussion around what the US and UN really need to do to make more progress on the SDGs. I saw them realize the urgency of action, and I saw their willingness to step in like true leaders do when called to act. Young people are disproportionately affected by many of the injustices that the SDGs tries to address, which means we are more affected when we, as a country, as a world, do not act. We feel it more deeply because we are more vulnerable to it. And our lived experience with facing these injustices are oftentimes not represented in the decision-making spaces that you, in this audience, have the honor to occupy. And so my call to action for you today is this. As American leaders at the local and federal level, in universities and in boardrooms, use your power to create spaces for our young leaders. Use your power to actively reach out to us, to hear our stories, thoughts, and ideas for informing the work that you do. Every decision you make in your roles should be through lenses of sustainability, equity, and the SDGs, which will inevitably require you to ensure our representation as well. We can never achieve a world that we dream of, a world of peace and justice for all, without our young people, our future. Thank you once again.
Well, thank you, Himaja, for that call to action. As she so eloquently laid out, youth leadership is central to progress on the SDGs, and it's critically important to continue to have youth representation at the table. So a big thank you to Himaja and all of our panelists and speakers, as well as the teams at the UN Foundation and the Center for Sustainable Development at Brookings for their help this morning in putting this on. In addition, before we leave, I just have to note how meaningful it's been to have U.S. government participation today, from Ambassador Carty, from Representative Lee. I'll also give a shout out to the agency where I served. I see senior colleagues from USAID here today, Michelle Similis from the Policy Bureau, Adam Phillips from the Development, Democracy, and Innovation Bureau. It's going to be very important to have USAID's leadership in driving global progress, so thank you for being here today and spending your time with us. How about another round of applause for all of our speakers and panelists today, and for you and the work that you all are doing. So this concludes the 4th edition of American Leadership in Advancing the SDGs. As I noted, the recording will be posted on our channels in the coming days. We encourage you to keep the conversation going, share it through your networks. We look forward to continued collaboration. So thank you very much for spending your morning here with us and for all the work that you're doing. good luck as you move forward into in person here at the UN General Assembly for the High Level Week. Thanks very much. There's a packed day ahead here at the Ford Foundation with the Transforming Education Summit, so just ask that you be timely as you exit. But thanks very much, and we'll see you next year.